Thank you for joining me today. I'd like to continue the conversation of what it looks like to lead like Jesus, particularly as it relates to servant leadership. Now, when you think of servanthood, do you envision it as an activity performed by the low skilled people at the bottom of some food chain or someone that's on the lower level of that flow chart? We often assume that if we serve people, they might lower their view of us. But this is really an incorrect perspective. Serving others has exactly the opposite effect on them from what we think it will. People are drawn to those who serve them sacrificially and certainly not repelled by them. Service adds value to individuals. Servanthood is not about position or skill, it really is about attitude. Leaders ought to seek ways in which we can add value to others, and the primary way in which we do this is, in fact, by serving them. John 13, the Savior of the world exhibited that he was also the greatest servant of all time. Not only was he a tremendous leader, but he was an amazing servant. When the disciples booked the upper room for the Passover feast, they forgot to secure the services of a servant to wash feet at the door. Interestingly, as the disciples realized that servant was missing, nobody volunteered for the job. Instead, they argued who, in fact, was the greatest. When Jesus saw this, he decided, you know what, I think I can make an object lesson out of this. And so after the supper, Jesus took the basin of water and a towel, began washing his disciples' feet. And so as Jesus interacted with his disciples, several lessons about service come to mind, particularly when it talks about in the passage of how we can add value to others. Christ like servant leaders are motivated by love to serve others. If we're going to be Christ like as leaders, we should be motivated by love. Jesus' love, it was undeserved, unending, unconditional, and unselfish. It was not the worthiness or the merits of the disciples that drove Jesus to serve them. He wasn't expressing gratitude, but really he was expressing grace. Love compelled him to serve his disciples. Think about it. Jesus even washed the feet of Judas Iscariot, the man who would betray him and have him killed the next day. Jesus understood this. And so, what it means for us today as Christ centered leaders, if we're going to be servant leaders in today's world, in today's context, we also must possess a security that allows us to serve others. Here's the deal. Jesus knew who he was, and he was secure enough to get down on the floor, and wash the feet of the disciples. Didn't have to prove anything. In fact, he had absolutely nothing to prove, nothing to lose, nothing to hide. The insecure are into titles, whereas the secure are into towels. Jesus' security enabled him to both stoop and stretch and reach and serve his disciples. Christ-like servant leaders initiate servant leadership to others. John chapter 13, verses 4 through 5. Jesus didn't wait for someone to clarify protocol. He saw a need and he went ahead and met the need. No one else had volunteered for the foot washing job that night. And so, in fact, Jesus was the catalyst of demonstrating what servant leadership ought to look like on that day, and certainly speaks to where we are today. Jesus started something that he had hoped would be passed down from those 12 disciples to others. Foot washing will never be fashionable. It'll be done by leaders who are willing to pioneer an act of humility and sacrifice. Christ-like leaders also receive servant ministry from others. A servant's heart, well, it exposes pride in others. Peter had a hard time letting Jesus serve him. He still possessed a worldly mindset that assumed that someone of Jesus' stature and caliber should never stoop to wash the feet of others. Sometimes leaders, we've got to learn to let others serve us. The reason is because we can become so used to serving others, it's difficult to relax and let others serve us. In this instance, Jesus was asking Peter to sit and allow the master to serve him. Christ-like servant leaders want nothing to hinder their relationship with God. Peter moved from one extreme to the other. If Jesus was going to wash him, he didn't want to miss anything he might do. He wanted Jesus to wash his entire body. Simon Peter exhibits a great attitude here. If Jesus was giving away, he wanted to receive all that Jesus was going to give. He didn't want anything or anyone to stand between him and the Lord. Servant leaders are also individuals who teach servanthood by their examples. Afterward, Jesus discussed the meaning of foot washing. He reminded them that the master had just washed their feet. So no position ought to be able to high or too low. No position should prevent them from doing it for someone else. Jesus let them know that, look, if he was able to wash their feet, they ought to be willing to imitate him. His model was to be reproduced. In fact, his example was so much more powerful than a lecture about the principles of service, because we have to understand that actions often speak louder than words. And so if we're going to do this correctly and appropriately, we too must be willing to model servant leadership, because we're taking our cue from Jesus Christ. We're taking how we should live as a servant leader from the greatest leader of all time, Jesus Christ. Christ-like servant leaders live a blessed life. Jesus reminded them they were blessed if they obeyed him in this lifestyle. The greatest blessing follows those who step out by faith and do the opposite of what the world is actually doing. Why? Because God blesses those who are counter-cultural from the world and serve people with no thought of getting anything in return for themselves. The return, in fact, comes from the Lord. It comes from God blessing them. When leaders serve, they add value to the people who receive their service. This value may be simple as feeling worthwhile or special. It could be that the value is a resource that we place in the hands of someone else, or an encouraging word that we might speak to them. Whatever it is, people will receive something. They will feel better about it. They will be blessed. And because of that, the leader has in fact invested in that individual. A good habit for leaders to try to add value to every single person that we meet. Try to add something to their lives rather than take something away. We must seek to replenish and encourage individuals around us to live higher for the Lord. Go further in God. That's what Jesus did, and that's what he would do day in and day out. And so, how do we lead like Jesus? Well, we put others ahead of our agenda. We develop the confidence and security to take risks on Jesus. We look for the need and we take initiative. We perform small acts, oftentimes anonymously, behind the scenes where no one but Jesus is watching. We learn to walk slowly through the crowd, observe what's happening so that we too can be able to bless someone else. We should begin our day reflecting on the love that we have for others in our life. Take a moment to count our blessings and in turn be a blessing to someone else. And ultimately, we must develop a bias for action. We must be catalysts for change, catalysts for transformations. Allow God to work through us, his Spirit to guide and lead us so that we too can emulate our great leader, Jesus Christ, and be true servant leaders in our world today. May God bless you.